Hello and welcome to Green Pass Gaming. This is your host Phlapp, and as always, joining us tonight in the co-hosting hot seat, we have Puxley. Hello, Pux.
Hello, Phlapp. How you doing? Thanks for having me once again, and hello, chat as well. I see we've got quite a vocal chat at the moment. Hope we're all well.
We do, yeah. Thanks for the chat. Yeah, I'm very good, thanks. Not a massive gaming news week so far. Well, perhaps not quite the gaming news we were hoping for, but there's some being bits and bobs. And obviously, we had Gotham Knights revealed yesterday and Suicide Squad. So yeah, there's some bits and bobs going on. Coming along for the ride with us tonight, we have our esteemed guest. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce and welcome Luke Steele to the show. Hello, Luke.
Hi there, hi gents. Thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, it's been a strange kind of gaming news week, kind of up and down, and then right at the end, some big stuff. So it's been really interesting, and happy to talk through some of it tonight.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, hopefully we're going to cover some of those bits on the topics that we've got tonight. We've got 4 topics. I might actually change the order around slightly. But so what have we been playing this week then, gents? It's been a bit of a week for releases, particularly Microsoft first-party releases, actually. So, Luke, what have you been playing this week?
Yeah, so the main thing I've been playing is Flight Simulator, actually, kind of in and out of that. And it's an interesting game because it's quite relaxing. So it's one of those that it has a little bit of a different feel to pretty much any other game, actually. And sometimes it's nice just to go on to appreciate the tech in that game, to kind of experience that. And in a world where travel's not particularly great, to just be able to drop somewhere in a plane and
never thought of that.
And have a look, and it's it's true to life pretty much, with a few barriers. So I've been playing that. Played a little bit of Battletoads as well, probably about an hour or so, which is quite enjoyable. And that's been mostly it, to be honest. It's kind of mostly been Flight Simulator at the moment.
I guess Game Pass has come to your rescue on that one, because obviously that's all available on Game Pass. Yeah, great. Yeah, it's been quite nice, actually, just to kind of have a stream of content that you're not having to fork out for, and it's just including the subscription. So that's been really good, and obviously the sizes of the games are different. Flight Simulator's kind of I wouldn't call it a AAA, but it's quite high budget, high concepts, and then you got something like Battletoads, which is a nice kind of starter game that you can just kind of jump in and out of as well. So it's been good. Excellent. Pux, what have you been up to this week then?
So very similar to Luke, actually. I've delved my toes into Flight Simulator as well. Not for too long. Well.
See, I know. I tweeted the other day. It's like, I just do not have a rig that will do that any justice. I either have to sort of spend a lot of money on a decent rig or wait for the Series X. But so, what are you getting out of it then, Pux?
Yeah, well, so I've only done about half an hour's worth of it, and I've been kind of doing the in-game flight school tutorials. Originally, I was using the keyboard, and then I kind of have a bit of a hard time controlling the plane. So I kind of have a weird. I don't know if you've had this, Luke. I've got like a weird combination of controller to kind of control some of the plane controls, and mouse pointer to do some of the other bits. So it's a bit of a mismatch of control.
Bit of a hybrid.
Yeah, it's going all right, I think.
It depends on what mood I'm in. I think, like, if I want to actually do the sim aspect, I'll use keyboard. Sometimes I just want to start above Tokyo and just roam around for a bit and look down. So I just plug in the control or connect the controller and just do that. And you can have these really simplified control schemes where you basically do very little apart from just kind of steer the plane.
Yeah.
I think I put mine on the option where you kind of have a modicum of help, but you also have to do a lot yourself. And I don't know whether I regret that at the minute, because I thought, it should be okay. But I've had a few moments of the plane kind of being out of my control a bit, and I crashed it a few times.
Yeah, I've had a few crashes as well. It's
outside of that, sorry, Phlapp. Done a bit of Battletoads as well. Playing a bit of that.
Yeah, that's what we've got running here. I don't know if you found. Have you managed to play multiplayer yet? Because it's only got couch co-op at the moment, which surprised me.
No, I've only done the single player so far. Right. Not played with anyone else yet.
it's a little bit like Cuphead, where the more players there are, the more sort of crazy it gets, and the harder it is to see what you're doing. You'd think that it would get exponentially easier, wouldn't you? But it doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, well, I find it hard enough at points on my own anyway. Yeah. So to know that it gets a bit harder is a bit interesting. And outside of that, I've also jumped into a bit of new Super Lucky's Tale. I like I like my 3D platformers, so I thought I'd jump into the kind of the upgrade of the original Super Lucky's Tale, which came out a number of years ago.
Oh, excellent! Is that on? That's on console as well as PC, I'm guessing.
Both, yes, I believe.
Oh, I've not downloaded that. Yeah, I saw it arrived on the Game Pass store. It's quite handy getting those little notifications pop up on your phone what's new. But so yeah, this is Battletoads. This is 2-player. Please don't get frustrated with the game footage, because there was an element where we're on the drive-in section where you're going zipping through the sort of the barriers and stuff. And
the bike section.
yeah, that was getting frustrating, but lots of fun. So it's quite a good intersection, actually, because I've been a flight simmer for a little while, actually, and I just don't really have the PC to run it. So I've been contemplating getting a gaming PC, which is probably going to cost me the best part of £1,500 with a monitor and probably a 2060 Super. The other alternative really was to wait for a Series X. Now, obviously, the Series X hopefully is going to be a hell of a lot cheaper than £1,500. But that kind of brings us on to our first topic, because there's been rumours this week that the Series X might cost as much as $600. Now, I think this kind of came from Alana Pierce, and I think there was a monster sort of promotion going on, and they listed how many Series X's they'll be giving away and what the total cost of the prize fund came to. And I think people extrapolated from that it could cost up to roughly $600. We also had this week the Hot Chips Technology Symposium, as it's officially called. They actually showed off some of the silicon inside the Series X. And I don't know about you two, but it was really impressive to see what they've got in there. So this is the really strange thing, really, because we've heard that the Series X might cost as much as $600. I've heard rumors that the Series S might cost as low as $200. Where do you think we are with it? Let's go to you first, Pux. What's going on with this? What can the prices be? What should they be?
What should they be? I think that's an interesting question that's got a load of caveats to it, because there's the kind of the console gamer side of me, which thinks that the console should be relatively cheap, and the games obviously shouldn't be too expensive, and most people should be able to just pick one up and plug and play. At the same time, these boxes are now becoming gaming PCs in a small box. So, I mean, obviously that power and that tech comes at a cost. So I can understand that the prices will be a bit higher than I think what most people are used to. But yeah, I heard this $600 figure as well. And if that is true, I don't see Microsoft coming well off out of this. I mean, apart from the hardcore amongst the Xbox crowd who will buy the system no matter what, I can't see many people that will jump to the system at that price, especially given that at least at launch that there's not really much, I don't think, which sells the system at this point in time. If I had to give, I mean, I would pay probably no more than $450 for it if it was me personally. Yeah, that's kind of what I think of it at the moment.
Well, it's an interesting take. Stubbs has said that Alana Pierce didn't actually say that, and that is correct. She was sent that information, but I think she put it out on her channel that was that had been sent to her. And obviously, the gaming community, as they do particular aspects of the gaming community, sort of picked up and ran with it. But so Luke, how do you feel about a $200 Series S? I mean, could they actually do that? Is there something in their back pocket that they could do?
I think they could do something along the lines of a $200 Series S. Whether they will or not, I think is another matter, because I don't know how expensive that hardware would be to manufacture. And there's, people oftentimes, say, well, it's Microsoft, they have very deep pockets, they can afford to take losses, blah, 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 which of course, they can, and, Sony can, and they all will take losses on the consoles when they sell them. But I don't know whether it's particularly viable for Microsoft to take huge losses on their hardware, because I don't expect them to sell huge amounts of hardware, and I don't think they're particularly interested in selling huge amounts of hardware. I don't think they're going to try and get into some kind of console price war with Sony, because I just don't think they're particularly interested in that route. They've expressed a lot of times that it's not about where you necessarily play their games, and I think if anything, the Xbox showcase back in last month or so showed that their emphasis is on Games Pass now. That is their bread and butter. So whether they will or not sell a Series S at that price point, I don't know, particularly given the tech that will still be in that box. You're still talking about an SSD, custom GPU with probably some ray tracing capability. It would be an incredible price for that kind of console, but I'm not convinced that they will price it that low. I would expect it to be somewhere at the kind of $299 mark, and then the Series X will be an uplift on that.
Yeah, I agree, and I see that. I think Microsoft have been very clever with this, and the Series S is a strange beast for me. And we kind of had this discussion with VJ last week, and he was he couldn't really see how it fitted in lots of ways. Actually, I think one of the ways that kind of struggled to see where it fitted in was obviously the power that it would output and what that's going to mean for the generation going forwards, having to always cater for that particular lowest denominator. But also, I think they're quite clever because the CPU is the same. So what we saw, apparently it's the same. There was a leak this week with Series S details on it, and it's stated that the CPU is exactly the same. The GPU had less compute units on it, but I'm guessing that it's actually going to be the same GPU as the Series X, but probably the ones that didn't quite cut the grade with regards to CUs. So they might actually be using the natural wastage that they get from the Series X manufacturing and putting those in the Series S. So it might not actually cost them quite as much as it seems, because obviously if they only had the Series X, there would be an element of chips that they would probably have to bin. But if they're able to use those in some way and put them in a cheaper unit, I'm wondering if that's where they're going to go with that. I also think Series S might be targeted at a slightly different audience from what they've targeted in the past, certainly from the Series X. I think Series S might actually be targeted at parents and obviously second console owners. So, a lot of kids' bedrooms don't have 4K TVs. So if the Series S is capable of 1080p and at a very cheap price, I think that might be very appealing to lots of parents out there, particularly if PS5 and the Series X comes in at $500 odd dollars. We've had a few comments actually, Pux. What's been going on in the comments?
So it's regarding actually some of the pricing you've mentioned about the $600 rumor. So this obviously came from Alana Pierce, which I think you also stepped on as well. And there's also been some talk about how Stubbs Gaming has mentioned that she's got into an argument with Review USA as he clickbaited what she said. So this is news to me. I hadn't heard this. But I think that's interesting. I mean, because I think I've not read too much into it, admittedly, but it's all rumor. Nobody really knows. But I think a source like Alana Pierce, you'd think that with information like that, yeah, maybe if it was clickbaity kind of material, then I'd probably argue that maybe that shouldn't have been done in such a way. What do you reckon?
No, I agree. And I guess, if you have a huge following like Alana Pierce, there is an element of responsibility on your shoulders and to not fuel the console war, I'm guessing. VJ also said there needs to be a $200 delta between the Series S and Series X. Now, I kind of get that. How do they get the value of the Series X up, Luke? I mean, if let's say they sell the Series S at $300, does that automatically mean the Series X has to be $500 just to get that extra value out of it to make it feel like it's that premium product?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think that the value is going to come from the uplift in hardware. That's where it's going to come from. And if there's a $200 price difference between the two, I think that's probably realistic. There needs to be enough of a gap so that you have a clear kind of pricing structure between them, so people can clearly delineate between this is the low end, this is the entry point hardware in the S, and here's
that's the thing, is that you don't want to make your premium product too cheap, I'm guessing, because that kind of devalues it to a certain degree.
Yeah, exactly. I think you need to, and I think they have been clearly marketing that as a premium product. And as you say, you can't have the price delta between them be too small, because then first of all, then it makes your base console almost obsolete, because if there's not a big enough gap, people will just plump for the more powerful, more capable console. And as you say, you don't want to devalue your higher end platform either. So I suspect that kind of the 200 delta difference would be about right.
So the other thing that was kind of dawned on me really is I think Microsoft, after the 2013 sort of debacle with the Xbox One launch, I think they wanted to obviously have the power narrative, which they've had since the Xbox One X, but they also wanted to have the cost narrative as well. And I was hoping at the time that they wanted the Series X to be cheaper than the PS5, but I'm actually wondering if the Series S might be their claim to say we're still the cheapest next generation console. So let's move on to the second topic, because it kind of does overlap really, and it's to do with the stock keeping units or the SKUs. What sort of movement is there in the SKUs, do you think, then, Puxley, to keep the costs down for Series X and Series S? Are we going to see multiple SKUs, do you think?
Not originally, I don't think we will. I would imagine that moving forward there may be adaptations, but then if we're talking different SKUs which are vastly different to the point where they're being sold as different models, I think this is where it might start to become confusing in the long run. But I'm mainly saying that in the kind of eyes of a general consumer, like a family with children who may not necessarily be too into the gaming space, unlike us guys are more kind of hardcore or kind of casual medium gamers. I think it's going to be a tricky or a bit of a dangerous game if you start to kind of introduce more different variants of your units. I kind of have a few mixed views. I mean, I did have the original view last week with VJ on the show that I thought it was originally quite a good idea to possibly sell like a Series S with a Series X at the same time this November. But then listening to VJ's comments last week or his opinions on that, it kind of it did sway me in that I did actually start to see the other side of the coin, that could cause some problems. In that you've got two different units, or people might get confused, and you've got all this cost difference. You might have different models to support, and I think that's another part of the problem. So the more kind of models that you introduce with potentially slightly varying spec, it's going to become a harder job on developers' point of view to then try to support all those with games running at as best as they can on all those platforms. Because all this time we've only really been officially told about the Series X, and we know that this is kind of the big machine, the one machine which you're going to want. It's going to play everything that you ever dreamed of in 4K 60, and everything's going to be fantastic. Then the idea of a Series S, which is cheaper, I think is good in one regard. But then I think immediately that this may potentially have a negative effect down the line when it comes to developers getting used to the new hardware, trying to push the capabilities as much as they can. But at the same time, they're going to have to make sure that their units run on these inferior systems which now exist. So I can't really give you a solid opinion, because I'm trying to kind of think about what I think myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if it's the great idea to have many SKUs moving forward, unless they start to potentially discontinue old ones. But then at the same time, people are still going to have those original units, right? So I think it's a dangerous game moving forward.
No, yeah, I see that. It can be a dangerous game, and particularly from game development point of view, because if they're having to support many SKUs with wildly different specs and outputs, then that's gonna be a drawback for the Xbox generation that the PlayStation just doesn't have. Do you think that they will launch the S concurrently with the X, Luke? What's their strategy in this?
I think it's quite difficult to tell, actually, because we're a couple of months out now from launch, and we've heard nothing about
That's
the
the strange thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, I feel like they should launch them concurrently, because if you're introducing a SKU down the line that's fundamentally different, then you've got to go through the whole process of trying to explain that at the time. Whereas, if they lead up to a launch and say we're launching with 2 consoles, here they are, this X and S, etc., etc., it makes a little more sense. But they may. It just may not have synced up from their manufacturing processes, from their own internal processes, as to when they wanted to launch them, and that might be why we've not heard anything of the S so far, and there doesn't seem to be any particular urgency to announce it. So
that seems peculiar in itself, doesn't it? Because and I'm quite pleased that it seems like it's going to be called the Series S, because us as a community have kind of called it that ourselves, and it does look like it is actually going to be called the Series S. It'd be quite jarring if it was called something else, but
yeah, and it makes sense from their naming conventions, from that perspective to call it that. But yeah, it is quite strange. I don't know whether they might have been holding off on it a little bit to see if they could kind of bait the price of the PS5 out of Sony, and then follow up that announcement with, here's this much cheaper entry point next generation console. So it may be that they've done that. I mean, they seem to schedule, or been supposed to have scheduled, the Series S reveal this month, and then I think it's probably been pushed back to next month now. So I don't really know what their strategy is with it in terms of announcement and then release, but it might be they take the kind of Apple or Samsung approach nowadays, which is, we've got a product, we want to announce it when it's really close to release because people get excited about it, and then they kind of impulse start to go out and try and get it. So they may do that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's getting very, very late in the day regarding pricing and things like that. I'm just wondering, I don't know if but I'm just wondering and guessing that actually people like Amazon and GameStop in the States and Game over here in the UK, I'm guessing they find out the price of these consoles at exactly the same time we do. I'm guessing they don't have any prior knowledge to the price of these consoles. I'm not really sure how the retail part of that works, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd imagine retailers would get more advanced notice of it than your common consumer would. As to how long that would be, I don't know the lead-in time, but probably, if I were to guess, I would imagine a couple of weeks, because ultimately they'll have to prepare for their own kind of on-site, adverts, in-store adverts. They'll be deciding how many units to get, etc. So those conversations are probably had, a couple of weeks or longer before the price is officially announced to the public. So
it's a very strange generation, this one, because no one's ever really tried to sort of hang on to the previous generation and support it, because we've talked about 2 SKUs so far, obviously the Series X and Series S, but that could be broken down into sub SKUs, I believe, because, as I say, there was a rumor that the Series S might come without a controller, it might come without an optical drive by the looks of things, and I'm guessing the Series X might not have those options, because I think it's seen as the premium unit, and it's going to be expensive, and you're going to get everything. You're going to get an optical drive, you're going to get a controller and things like that. But do you think, we'll go to Pux on this one, do you think that we might see a mid-generation upgrade relatively soon, given the All Access program? Because it does seem that the All Access program lasts 2 years. It does make me wonder if Microsoft would want to keep people in the All Access program and to keep them paying that monthly fee, whether they adopt the same stance as the mobile phone sector and actually release a mid-generation upgrade every couple of years. Is that something you think could happen?
I think it could happen. I don't think 100% think it's something that is in Microsoft's pipeline at the moment. Main reasons being that I don't think there is a large proportion of people and gamers out there which would want to be paying a monthly subscription for a console. I think I'm saying this mainly because I sit in this camp. If people in the chat disagree, please bring it up. I'd be interested to know.
Yeah, there's some chat going on actually around this.
Yeah, I've got some things to bring up in a minute regarding chat as well. Some good things going on there. Sorry, but no, where was I? Yeah, so I personally would rather buy a console outright. and then just kind of play and pay as I go, depending on what games or other stuff that I want, assuming that things aren't coming to Game Pass, Xbox centric, obviously. But I know that an all access program could do well for people who may not be able to afford what is obviously a larger cost. Let's just randomly give it about a $500 figure, rough average.
Apparently, we've got more news that it's being rolled out into at least another 20 territories before the Series X launch.
What's that? Sorry, the
all access.
All access.
It's only available in 3 territories at the moment, which I believe is the UK, the US, and Australia.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. In that case, well, that kind of maybe gives it a bit more credibility that maybe they are thinking of doing more. But then where does that sit with people who buy outright and those who kind of fork out the full amount for the system they want on launch day, and then they're being told, oh, okay, if you want this slightly newer model which can do X amount more, we'll give you we'll give you $100 or pounds toward the next system, and you've got to fork out the rest. Like, is there a chance then under that maybe that kind of scheme that maybe people who buy it outright could potentially be worse off in terms of the money they pay? Is there a risk there, do you reckon, or do you think that would be tried to be compensated out? Because this would be retailer to retailer, I'd assume.
Well, I think it's the same thing, isn't it? Because it's basically an interest-free loan, isn't it, that you spread out over monthly installments. So people that have bought outright have paid the same amount of money as people on the all access program. I guess the only difference is that people on the all access program have set aside a certain amount of money that they're paying per month, and will just continue to pay that to have a sort of an incremental upgrade on perhaps the Series X, like I put in the title, actually, like Series XL or something that's got a slightly beefed up memory, bigger SSD and things like that. But it does make me wonder if Microsoft, because particularly with the smart delivery, whether they're able to deliver this kind of multi-SKU approach, does make me wonder. Luke, how does having to support the previous generation, because again, we're talking sort of SKUs as in terms of Series X and Series S, but when you think about it, they've actually got Xbox One X, Xbox One S, they've got the original Xbox One. How do they move support away from those devices, and how soon do you think we're going to start seeing that?
I think they've probably already started doing that, in the sense of the talk from Phil Spencer, etc., fairly early on was trying to develop games across generations, trying to at least for a couple of years into the new gen support the old consoles. But I think they've learned quite quickly that it's not the wisest decision to make, and to be honest, from Microsoft's perspective, I don't see why they would support things like the One X and the S, because especially the S, as in the One S, because they don't have the install base even that Sony do in terms of hardware. So
that's a very good, actually. Yeah, they don't, do they?
They still have a significant 50 million owners of an Xbox console, but I don't see why you would be tethered to frankly archaic hardware in the One S, which will significantly weigh down your development on new generation games at a kind of game design level as you're coming into them. And I think the showcase that they had a couple of months ago showed that approach seems to have been pushed a little in the wayside, because there was a lot of games they were kind of very quietly withdrawing the Xbox One support for. It wouldn't even surprise me, although I think it's somewhat unlikely, if Infinite went that way by the time it's re-revealed, in that they just cut the S version entirely, or just have a kind of multiplayer mode across that. But campaign is exclusive to new gen PCs, etc. So I think
an interesting point. So you mean split out single player and multiplayer depending on the platform you're on?
Yeah, I mean multiplayer is going to be free to play anyway, and they can scale that very easily across lots of different platforms, because it's not going to be particularly hardware intensive. In terms of, I guess, I think for Microsoft, it's just it's just trying to offer as many options into their ecosystem as possible. And I don't think they have in their mind the need to try and migrate as many users from 1X, 1S over to the Series X or S, because that's not their model anymore. Their model is just, have a subscription, please. And go from there. So I think their approach is just to try and, through things like All Access or through just Game Pass as a whole, offer value to consumers, offer an easy route in to their games, and then hopefully they'll continue on that path. I don't actually expect, I would be really surprised if we had mid-gen kind of upgraded consoles this time round, because I don't see where there is to go in that front. The older consoles, as in the 1X and the Pro, was specifically to enable 4K gaming at a console level. So the upgrades that they had at the 1X was more significant, but it was primarily targeted on GPU power, because obviously that is the thing that a high resolution requires. Mid-gen of this next gen, where exactly are you going? What's the need for a mid-gen refresh, unless you're just looking for a more PC approach in how you're going about things. So
well, I think that's the essence of the All Access program. It depends how you read it, really, because if you think of the All Access program as just a very cost-effective way to buy quite an expensive piece of equipment in its own right, then that kind of works, doesn't it? We are used to that in the mobile sector. But if they're actually moving towards an incremental upgrade, so that not only do they secure your £25 or perhaps $30 a month for 2 years to pay off the device, but if at the end of that term they've got an incrementally slightly better one with perhaps, like I said before, perhaps 3 terabyte SSD, more CUs on the GPU, slightly more memory, slightly an upgrade, basically an incremental upgrade, a little bit like PCs, then you get into that continuing to spend that money on a monthly basis. I guess it makes me wonder if they might go down that route.
I think they could, but again, a mid-gen upgrade of this gen, as in the generation coming up. I mean, if you SSD storage, you have expendable storage anyway, so offering an internal drive that's a bit bigger isn't really it's not going to be a particularly lucrative reason to upgrade. And you could beef up your GPU, you could add extra RAM, you could clock your CPU higher, but the benefit to the end user of that is going to be unless it's significant upgrades across the board, it's going to be minimal, because you can't go many other places right now other than 4K 60 FPS at very high settings. Whereas this gen, there was a need, not a need, but a clear space they could move into, because console gaming has only ever operated at either below or at HD, and 4K is a significant enough resolution leap that it made sense to have a mid-gen refresh where you can introduce that to consumers, combined with the adoption of 4K TVs, which was really kicking off at the time that those consoles came into play, and now it's kind of ubiquitous. I mean, it's very difficult to not be able to buy a 4K TV now, and the only place to go, I guess, would be 8K gaming. But if you think that a mid-gen console is going to game at 8K, you're having a bit of a laugh, really, because it's incredibly demanding, and it's just not going to be possible. So I think the point of All Access is to just get someone into the ecosystem early on, get them a device, that they might like to use, and then you've done your job essentially, because then it's the consumer. If by that point you would hope you buy your console on All Access, 2 years in, you hope that your end consumers locked into Game Pass, they're really enjoying it, they keep spending money on games, third party stuff, microtransactions, etc. So you've already got them at that point. I don't think there's any need to introduce some kind of add-on scheme where you can buy a mid-gen console when for Microsoft, they're not really bothered about selling the console anyway. They just want to keep you locked into the subscription services. So
no, that's a very valid point, and like you say, they have created an absolute beast in the Series X, and so perhaps, like you say, they've negated the need for a mid-generation console, because I think they always felt like they had a bit of a bloodied nose after 2013 and the Xbox One launch. The Xbox One X was almost inevitable, perhaps. Pux, should we catch up on the chat? I'm conscious we haven't been to the chat for a while.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to go back a little bit. So I know when we was talking originally about will the Series S and Series X launch at the same time, what our thoughts were. Mr. Tushy had a comment saying that they need to, so they can get people into the ecosystem at a cheap price before people decide to buy a PS5 instead. I find that quite an interesting comment, actually, regarding getting them into the ecosystem before they buy a PS5. It's a cheaper entry point. But I know we've had this discussion before. I don't know how much you'd like to spend on this topic in particular, but I mean, we all know that Sony with the PS5 are kind of very much going in with this is the next generation, new system, new power. We're not going to support the old because that is old and we don't want to have that kind of burden on us, I suppose, is my own summary of what they may be thinking about it. What do we reckon on this? Do we think that a cheaper price will get people into the ecosystem? I suppose this is also linked to how close people feel towards their brand of choice, I assume, right?
Yeah, so I guess brand loyalty comes into it, and people that want a PS5 will go and buy a PS5. I think it's the middle ground casual gamers. What do you think, Luke? It always seems to me that the Series S was targeted at sort of parents with children and people that just wanted a sort of second console. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's a console that's clearly for the person who walks into a game shop and wants a next generation console at the cheapest price. I think that's where it's aimed at. It's not aimed at anyone on this panel or in the chat or any kind of hardcore gamer at all, because it's not going to deliver an experience I think that we all expect. Across 4K displays, etc. High frame rates. So I think it's very much for people who might not even be interested in console gaming at all, but they're very tempted by a very low price.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't know if you've seen the leak, but the leak did surprise me because it did say that the Series S looks like it's targeting 1440-60, because I think the rumors had kind of been 1080-60, but it looks like it's got a little bit more power under the hood than perhaps first expected, perhaps. Anything else going on in the chat, Pux? What else?
Well, regarding to what we're talking about, Mr. Tushy has also mentioned again that I think Xbox Series X will be popular for PS5 fans that want to dip into the Xbox ecosystem on a budget. And I think this is actually quite a good point on what I just said a minute ago, that people have brand loyalty. And if you are a PS5 and Sony gamer, then you'll probably stick to your PlayStation. I know Twitter is very much... I know there's the whole gamer which side he won battle. I don't see that battle stopping anytime soon, but it's very clear that there are PlayStation fans out there. So I think that's actually a really good point. For those that maybe want to dip into some Xbox exclusives, may not have a gaming PC to dip into Game Pass that way. I guess having a budget Series X is actually a pretty good option if you are on the other side of the fence, but want to dip into some Xbox exclusives.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as much as I sort of think that the Series S is targeted at parents, it's also just as equally targeted as the second console sort of gamers out there as well. And like you say, if you don't have the budget to have the top tier of each system, the Series S is a great choice. One thing I did actually meant to ask Luke earlier, actually, is that I guess with the current generation of Xbox Ones out there, if they can support xCloud, then I'm guessing that shouldn't really be too much of a factor that holds back the generation going forwards, or that that you don't necessarily have to code for those machines if you can code for what's in the xCloud.
Yes, I mean, I would envisage that somewhere down the line, Microsoft will probably upgrade their server blades to an Xbox, Xbox One S, an Xbox Series S, because that will be the cheapest to manufacture in that form, and then you have as a base for your xCloud stuff that console, or the hardware in that console, rather than trying to populate it with Series X hardware, which would be, really difficult to do, really expensive. And also it helps that xCloud is, I think at the moment at least, it's trying to just deliver a 1080p frame buffer rather than, kind of Stadia levels of, 4K 60 HDR or all that kind of stuff. So, but I mean, the the kind of ethos that came out of Microsoft a little while ago about trying to hold on to this older hardware, from my perspective, I really dislike it, because games are extremely scalable. You can scale up particular modern hardware. You can scale games up and down, to significant extents. Sea of Thieves can run at 360p on PC, terrible settings.
Yeah.
But you essentially kind of bottleneck developers at the game design stage as to what they can implement. If you think about, if you even think about things such as, if developers want a massive open world with really high LODs and no loading at all, none of that kind of corridor crawling that you get this generation. You're immediately struck out of that if you're supporting the Xbox One S, because it's just not possible to do that. And that applies even for visuals as a whole. So you can scale geometry up and down as much as you like, but there comes a point where you just can't scale it anymore because you're fundamentally changing the look of the game or fundamentally changing how that game performs. So I've always really disliked it. So and I think it would hold back their consoles in some respects. I don't think in all, but I'm quite pleased anyway, because it appears that they're not doing that now. So, or they're trying to really minimize it. So that's quite nice.
Yeah, I think back in the day it was good PR speak for Phil Spencer at the time to say that they're going to support all of the backwards backwards generation. But like you say, I think the reality of that for us as gamers, and there is a percentage of us that's hardcore gamers as well. I assume that's a smaller minority compared to all of the casual gamers out there, but it's still a big deal for us. And I think PlayStation have been very clear, because when Puxley and I did the PS State of Play reveal, we did a live reaction, and it was very black and white what was for PS4 and what was for PS5. And you could see that very clear delineation between the two. And I think that will help, obviously, first-party titles progress forward for Sony. That you will see the benefits of that ultra-fast SSD and the worlds that they can deliver. Pux, is there anything else? What else have we got in the chat? I did actually hear the Hot Chips did suggest that the CPU for the Series X was kind of a server grade CPU, which surprised a lot of people. I think it was able to sustain the frequencies at a high temperature for a long time. But there was also a rumor that perhaps that's because they want to stick these in the Azure and the server blades to be actually run Series X games. I think they said they could run so per system on the chip they could run obviously one Series X, or they could actually run 4 Series S concurrently games on that blade. It was quite interesting to see the sort of the scale that they went to on the Hot Chips. Did you catch up with any of that, Luke?
Yeah, I saw a bit of it. It was really interesting, actually. And I mean, the takeaway I got was that and you can see this just from the specs alone, irrespective of any Hot Chips presentation. But it's a very, very capable piece of hardware. Even compared to current high-end PCs, it's extremely capable. It's kind of a really impressive feat of engineering in of itself, and I think that's part of the reason I think that I'm so against this kind of cross-generation support, because really you want that kind of hardware to be exploited to the best of its capabilities.
Yeah, you're anti that as well, aren't you, Pux?
Yeah, to a degree. You've also kind of reminded me in a way. I don't want to switch topics too much, but I've been looking at the chat, and I'm also about the do we want to buy a Series X, Series S if you're a PS5 game or whatever. And I know we're talking about xCloud for a bit now as well. This is another proposition, because I've seen some reviews actually on xCloud that people have been playing the beta, and it's actually people are saying that in terms of latency that it's almost as good as just having the system in front of you, right?
I'm not sure I'd say that.
Well, okay, I've seen the reviews that do talk to the contrary. I've seen some people playing Halo online through xCloud and having a good experience, and it was just kind of making me think that maybe it's early days still, right? It's still beta, it's still brand new, right? But moving forward, do we think that because there was always talk that will the world move forward to the point where we don't have boxes anymore, we just stream it all like Netflix, which is what Game Pass is ultimately, I think, trying to become with xCloud in the long run. Assuming that most of the world's internet speeds can perform and have the right speeds to support it, do we reckon that this could be a thing in the future? Is Xbox just a service now, that it's not just a system anymore? And that's similar to PlayStation, because they're not exploring this yet. But I mean, there is the PlayStation Now service, which is okay. I've tried it myself; it's not too bad. But do we?
My personal feelings on that is that Microsoft have the infrastructure to be able to do that, but I'm not convinced it's going to be a pleasant gaming experience. There's at this moment in time, there's no substitute for a very powerful box under your TV that has very low latency. I've played Sea of Thieves and games like that. I've played F119, strangely enough, the other day on xCloud, and there is latency there. It's not the easiest thing to play. So games are playable. And the strange thing is it does actually lend itself a lot more to sort of indie games, the ones that don't rely on the Twitch reaction quite like things like Call of Duty or first-person shooters, really. It's perfect for those sort of things. Have you had much experience with xCloud, Luke?
Yeah, I've played a bit of it, the beta. I played the preview months ago now as well. I don't think, at least in the immediate future, and I think I'm talking sort of 15, 20 years, I can't see dedicated hardware going away because you'll always have an audience for that stuff, and you will. I can't imagine honestly in perhaps my lifetime getting an experience that is just like native hardware across a cloud system. I mean, I'm quite lucky because I've got a gigabit connection, and there is still latency, even with that, even across a really high speed internet connection, and there's still macro blocking, there's still compression, there's still delay sometimes. It's a really impressive service, and I think it's really cool for what it is. But it not just that, but I'm in a fortunate position that I've got that connection. But if you look at the world's internet kind of speeds in general, a lot of places, particularly the UK in rural areas, really struggle to get high broadband speeds capable of outputting xCloud as it is, which is on 720. I think it's 720p 60 maximum at the moment. So by the time you start getting up to 4K feeds, etc., you're going to have significant beefy connections, and I think Microsoft are capable of putting that out there, but I don't think there's in terms of their infrastructure, but I don't think there's the infrastructure on the other side at consumer level to make that a case of, oh well, we don't need dedicated hardware now because it's just as good.
No, I agree, and things like the Kishi Razor, where we physically plug it into your device to remove the Bluetooth latency, at least helps some way. But you've always got that latency. I can't see that disappearing anytime soon, unfortunately, unless, like you say, I don't know what 5G is like for latency. I've not had any experience with 5G, and we did discuss last week that the Asian market is obviously a big market for Microsoft yet to be tapped into, and they have some pretty good 5G services over in certain parts of East Asia, on whether xCloud could actually be viable over there on that service. It makes you wonder.
Yeah, I've actually had some experience of it on 5G as well. Okay. On a train journey in the UK that I had a couple of months ago. It's pretty good. It works quite well across it. Almost at the levels of a kind of if you're sat next to your Wi-Fi in your house. But I think it's just certainly from a hardcore gamer, regular gamer perspective, it's still so far away. And even if you play Stadia, which is at the moment more advanced than xCloud in terms of what it offers, it's still, even at 4K 60 HDR, it's not like having the box in front of you at all. It's really nice looking and it works well, but it's just not the same.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've just seen Mr. Tushi in the comments saying he struggled with Halo 5 and Killer Instinct, where he kept losing his combo, and that doesn't surprise me. You just, those Twitch reactions, it's just not fast enough for that. Pux, are we done with the chat for the time being? Should we move on?
Yeah, I think we're up to date for now. I think we're good to move
on. Thank you for that. I mean, that's been quite in depth, all of that, and I know that the two sort of topics overlapped a little bit, and I know, I do appreciate, and I thank everyone in the chat as well. I know these topics have been done to death, but we've not really done them to death on this show. I think that we've kind of done those now, and the only thing left to do is wait for the information to be delivered. Topic 3. It's going to be Call of Duty, actually. We haven't really discussed Call of Duty at all on this show, Pux. I know that in 3 days' time, we're going to find out a lot about Black Ops Cold War. But Call of Duty has been in trouble over the last few years. I think perhaps this year with Modern Warfare is the first year for a little while that things have settled down. But again, in 2020, it's all kind of gone wrong again. So in 2017, Sledgehammer made World War II. And then halfway through the game, once it had launched, the two head studio leads, Michael Condrey and Glenn Schofield, left the studio, which was very peculiar. And then 2018, Treyarch with Black Ops 4 launched without a single-player version of the game. It did have a version of Battle Royale, Blackout, but again, wasn't quite obviously the same as Warzone that we're used to now. And this year, Sledgehammer was supposed to be designing this year's game, but Treyarch have had to step in and do their game that, I'm guessing was slated actually for next year. So, Pux, do you think Activision are in trouble with Call of Duty, or are they slowly trying to bring it back in? Because normally the release information for Call of Duty is normally around April, March time, I believe. But obviously, here we are last week in August, and we're due this information for a game that's likely to be releasing in November. Are they in trouble?
I think possibly, yes. I mean, for the reasons you stated earlier about a few years ago when there was kind of a weird era of kind of Modern Warfare games, like going into, was it Infinite Warfare, I believe, and there was a few other Black Ops games, and Black Ops 4 didn't even have any single player. There was a number of reasons at the time why I kind of didn't really dip into a Call of Duty game, I think, properly after, I think, Black Ops 1 and Modern Warfare 3. That's kind of where I left it, really. It wasn't until this Modern Warfare where I kind of, all the information regarding the current game before its release and watching the gameplay footage and how it was all kind of going back to its roots of Modern Warfare, Call of Duty 4, the first Modern Warfare game, that kind of brought a lot of hope in for me. So when the game did come out and I played it, I absolutely loved it. I'm a massive fan of the current game. I think it picked up on everything it said it wanted to do, and I think it's done right to, I don't want to say correct the wrongs, because there are a lot of Call of Duty fans out there, and I think a lot of people would argue that there was good mechanics in each of the subsequent games between, say, the original Modern Warfare and now, and all the Black Ops games. But there was something about going back to the new modern day, I should say, with regards to Modern Warfare that I really liked. And then this kind of brings me on to a bit about what I think about the multiplayer, I guess, because yes, we don't know much about Cold War yet, apart from it's obviously taking part during the Cold War. But before Modern Warfare came out, there was a lot of talk about how they wanted to try and unify the multiplayer aspect of it. And with the release, I believe, earlier this year with the Modern Warfare 2 remaster, I mean, that only got released, only the campaign, got released for that. There was no multiplayer because it was stated that they didn't want to segregate the multiplayer experience. They wanted the multiplayer experience to be consolidated into this one platform, which was Modern Warfare, which also houses Warzone as well, which is obviously the free-to-play version. So, of course, there's the introduction of the Battle Pass as well, which is seeing seasonal updates within Warzone, if you're a fan of that, or if you just like the standard multiplayer, which is what I mainly play when I do play it. You obviously get all the new weapons and other skins and all that kind of stuff if you care about it. But then with that, there was talk that Call of Duty multiplayer moving forward would kind of be this one united kind of ecosystem in its own right. Like the Call of Duty world is going to be under one hub. Again, I know we don't know much details yet regarding Cold War, but I can't help but get the impression that with, as you say, Sledgehammer meant to be doing this one, but Treyarch have had to come in and try and basically save the day with it, I guess, is one way of putting it. I'm a bit concerned that is this about the multiplayer potentially getting segregated again. I mean, I can understand why, because we're in a different era, and the two games are complete opposites in what the kind of story and setting they're trying to tell and portray. So I can understand why you need some segregation. But the messaging with Modern Warfare originally was about this was meant kind of, or at least the way I interpreted it at the time, was that this was meant to be the start of kind of a new Call of Duty experience where it will just kind of almost be ever expanding, I guess, to a degree. But now I kind of think maybe we're heading back into this segregation that, come say November, December this year when the new game comes out, Modern Warfare, as we kind of know and love it currently, will just get left by the wayside, as all Call of Duty games at some point do, and then it will just kind of be abandoned, which I think is going to be a real shame, because I think it has a lot of potential and a lot of growth still to be kind of tapped into it.
Yeah, they're very valid points. I'd like to bring Luke in, actually, because it's a very valid point about it turning into a platform, because when we were playing, we played quite a lot of multiplayer, didn't we, with Modern Warfare? And it felt a very good system, actually, compared to previous systems where there was obviously marketing rights and things. All platforms got the latest updates day and date based on the Battle Pass. And it did seem like it was going to be turning into more of a platform rather than sort of annual games, and with the addition of Warzone, that seemed to solidify that even more. But Luke, do you think Call of Duty is in trouble? Are we going to move to a platform at some point in the future, or are they going to keep releasing piecemeal standalone titles, do you think?
I don't think it's in trouble, and I don't think they will move to this kind of service system where there's no annual releases or biannual releases. I think when people say Call of Duty is in trouble, I think it has to be looked at in the context of what is trouble for Activision, because Call of Duty typically does huge numbers throughout the year, and there are dips sometimes, but they're only dips relative to the massive highs that Call of Duty hits in terms of sales. And I think for that reason, they wouldn't, at least I expect Warzone to kind of remain as it is for a long time. I don't think they'll introduce kind of a new battle royale experience for every Call of Duty, because I think that's clear that that's their service avenue, and there's no need to do that.
So you think they'll evolve the Warzone side of things?
Yeah, outside of a release. So I expect, for example, when the next one comes out, that Warzone will be updated, but you don't need to own. Clearly, you won't need to own the new Call of Duty to be able to access that. But I think they'll keep these fresh releases coming. Whether they continue them annually, I think, is a different matter, because they might see more value in taking their time with them to make them bigger and better, more significant releases. Particularly as been highlighted, the trouble they've had with Sledgehammer, etc. So, I'd be interested to see what this next one looks like, apart from the bits that have been revealed so far as to setting, etc. And then also how they're going to monetize the more general elements of it outside of Warzone. But I don't think it's in trouble at all at the moment.
No, that's a fair point. And I've thought for a little while. I'm wondering if they want to try and turn it into a subscription service. And I think what you were saying is that perhaps you don't possibly think that. I don't know, but I think it's a big enough franchise for it to have its own subscription service where you pay something like $4.99, £5 a month for a subscription, and basically you always have the very latest version of every release that there is. Battle Pass kind of does that to a certain degree. It does this strange thing where you actually, I think it's about £10, isn't it? 10 UK pounds. But if you play through the different stages of the Battle Pass, then you actually earn enough coins to pay for the next season. It just makes me wonder where they might be going with Call of Duty. It's an interesting franchise, and it has obviously had its ups and downs. What do you think they might do with it in the generations that are coming, assuming that we've moved away from the things like the Xbox One S and possibly even the One X? Where will they take the franchise? Is it just going to be more of the same, do you think, or are they going to try and actually leverage the advances of the next generation with bigger maps and things like that? Is that something they can do, Luke?
I think so. I mean, across Warzone, I wouldn't expect them to introduce, significant changes to how that operates. They might increase player caps, etc., on introduce new modes. But again, it's hard with Warzone because they will definitely want to support last generation systems, all kinds of different PC rigs. And you can't be introducing, features that will fundamentally alter that experience because those older pieces of hardware won't get that, and you can't have that in a multiplayer setting. So I don't expect them to do anything or very much there apart from just kind of naturally evolve the mode. I would expect them to make significant leaps in their single player, but they did that really with Infinite Warfare, where they kind of retooled or significantly retooled their engine to the point where Call of Duty went from kind of looking like a generally nice game to actually one of the best looking games of the generation. It's incredibly impressive. I played it on my PC, and it looks fantastic. And I think I just wonder how much effort they're going to really want to put into single player experiences across that game, because let's be honest, it's not, for me, it's the reason I would play Call of Duty game, but for 95% of people, it's not. So most people don't play it, or the single player game, or if they do, they don't finish it, and it's kind of straight onto multiplayer. So I'd be interested to see what they do. I suspect perhaps some of the bigger innovations will come on the kind of non-battle royale multiplayer modes. So, kind of introducing, and I know they have this already, but bigger scale, massive team battles, massive destruction, kind of introducing that and leveraging new consoles in that way. But apart from that, I can't see the problem is, I think I can't see Activision looking to really redefine the genre or anything like that, just for the sake of new hardware. There'll have to be some kind of end money result in it.
No, that's a very valid point, and I'm hoping, because when I bought my Series X, I managed to get that on day and date. I think World War II launched not long after. I think it was a matter of weeks, and I was absolutely delighted to see that they'd tried to do a 4K 60 version of World War II on the One X, because at that time Sony had the sort of had the marketing rights basically, and were utilizing that quite heavily. So for them to support the Series X like they did, I was really pleased with that. So again, I'm hoping that with these next generation consoles that we are going to see perhaps 120 frames a second in the multiplayer. That would be quite nice, because being cross-platform, the PC, there's always been that argument between mouse and keyboard and controller, but I play on my Xbox One X. Puxley plays on his PC, and there is a bit of a difference because you've got a much wider field of view, haven't you, Pux? And you can see things further afield than that. So, the balancing of the generation that's coming, particularly if it's all cross-platform, is something that they need to look at. But I'm just hoping that they utilize the 120 frames a second and the power of the next generation. Do you think marketing rights are a thing in the past, Pux? Are we going to see those going forwards for Call of Duty specifically? Because obviously, again, at the beginning of this generation, Sony were lent heavily into Call of Duty. I personally think that led to a lot of Call of Duty YouTubers jumping ship over to Sony because they had the marketing rights and they were going to get the DLC early. But with this year's 2019's Modern Warfare, the Battle Pass seems to have been an equalizer on that front. Do you think that Call of Duty is going to be marketable like that for the platform holders, or are we going to see a bit more of a normalized sort of strategy from them?
I think all the time that the Sony versus Microsoft battle is very much we want you to play our system and no other. I think there will always be that marketing right, especially for something like Call of Duty. I think the transition from the Xbox 360 era to the current gen, again, with the marketing rights for Call of Duty specifically kind of jumped from the Xbox to the PlayStation. And as you said, streamers at the time were even seen to swap the system they were playing and streaming on between the Xbox to PlayStation, because it had that exclusive content and it got viewers involved. And I suppose for those people that do stream, to be able to showcase that content is what gives you a following, right? So I think for the time being, and for the time when there's always a battle between each of the platform holders, I think there will be. I think marketing rights will very much be here to stay for the foreseeable. I guess if a time was to come in the future where the gaming worlds were all unified and everyone loved each other and it didn't matter who was where, I guess at that point it may start to dissipate. But I can't personally see it disappearing anytime soon. Sorry, especially for a large brand such as Call of Duty.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just wonder what it's going to look like. What do you think, Luke? Do marketing rights still exist with Call of Duty in the coming generation?
I think so. I think they will. I think they'll kind of still stick with Sony.
That's interesting, because I was expecting perhaps Microsoft to have nabbed them back, particularly if they've got the power narrative. But you think they'll stay with Sony?
Yeah, I do. I think Call of Duty, from my recollection, earns most of its money across PlayStation platforms anyway. So I think it's a kind of a key. I think from both perspectives, from Activision's and Sony's, but particularly from Sony's, they like to have kind of the big mainstream games, advertised across their platforms. And I would expect they would probably fork out a significant amount of money to keep it that way. Not that I don't think Microsoft wouldn't be willing to do that, because it's one of the biggest games in the world. So if you have it on your platform and you have exclusive marketing rights for it, it's very tempting, no matter which platform holder you are. But I just think coming off kind of the PS4 generation, all the momentum's kind of with Sony on that front. So I would expect that most publishers would opt, unless they get a big amount of money otherwise, to go with Sony. But it'd be interesting to see.
I've got a question for both of you, and it's a yes/no answer. Do you think in the next 5 years something like Crossfire X could potentially be a threat to Call of Duty, Pux?
No. If you want just a short answer, I don't think it will. I don't think it has the following or I don't know, staple, I suppose. Is that the right word for it? I just don't think it's got the same amount of time given to it as much as everyone else is into Call of Duty, unless it starts to offer something substantially different.
Luke?
It's not really a yes or no from me, but it's kind of a bit of both. So worldwide, absolutely not a chance. In certain markets, it already is much bigger. So in Korea, Crossfire X is absolutely massive, and Call of Duty is non-existent. And across other Asian countries, it's the same. So it will continue. Crossfire X will continue to dominate in those areas, but it won't make a dent in most Western countries.
It's a very interesting sort of, well, it's not really an acquisition, but it was very interesting to get that studio on board to bring Crossfire and Crossfire X, which is obviously the console version, over to the Xbox consoles. I think it was a very wily move, to be honest. And I'm not sure it's a complete no. I think you're right, Luke. I think it depends which market you look at, and because I played the beta. And it was a bit clunky, and it wasn't Call of Duty, and that was the first thing I noticed, and I think that would be the first thing most people notice, that it's not Call of Duty. But whether they actually buy into it and it becomes its own thing, don't know. Time will tell on that one.
Yeah, I think it's I quite like. I mean, the single player campaign, which has been made by Remedy, looks actually really, really good, and I think that could be a really good showpiece of next generation hardware. I mean, the Series X in particular, and it will certainly generate buzz solely from that. But I also think perhaps Microsoft missed a trick on that, because if you go back to the showcase and have a look when that game appears, the single player portion actually has to be purchased separately, so it's not included in Game Pass, which I think is quite disappointing, because if it was, I think it would make quite a significant splash, but as it is, I'm not sure how much, unless they really push marketing behind it. I'm not sure how well it will do in the West, but we'll see. You never. I mean, you just never know. Nobody expected Fall Guys to blow up like it has. So you just don't know. Sometimes games can come out of left field and surprise you in terms of how well they're received.
No, very interesting. I think we're probably done with Call of Duty. I mean, I've been playing. Well, I've been playing Call of Duty since Medal of Honor. Actually, in fact, I hated Call of Duty because I could never see the point in Call of Duty because we had Medal of Honor at the time, back in the PS2 days and on PC Frontlines. Used to love all of that, and then this new kid on the block, Call of Duty, came along, and couldn't see the point. And then at the beginning of the 360 era, Call of Duty 2 was kind of a launch title, and it looked amazing on the 360. I remember being blown away by how it looked, and well, the rest's history. So Mr. Tucci says that he just is out of left field a little bit. He says he doesn't have to pay for Ultimate because he's getting 15,000 points on Xbox Rewards every month. I have no idea what you're doing, Mr. Tucci, to get 15k per month on Xbox Rewards. But for those who don't know, Xbox Rewards is a service that sort of Microsoft stroke Xbox do, and you can earn points for using things like doing searches in Bing, getting certain achievements, and using the Game Pass app and things. And they're not massively generous with what they give you. And I think for every 5,000 points that you get, you can actually convert that into UK pounds. I think it's just over 5,000 points equates to about £5. So I have no idea what Mr. Tucci's doing for that. Do you two buy into the Xbox rewards at all?
Personally, this is something I've always known it's existed for a while, but I've just ultimately ignored it. I've not really bothered with it because, to be honest, I didn't necessarily know that you could get the rewards that Mr. Tucci has said on it. So I'm going to have to check this out after the stream, I think.
And to be fair to Microsoft, they're trying to push things like being on you and using Edge and stuff like that. But have you used it, Luke?
Annoyingly, I live in this sort of grey zone area for a lot of these kind of promotional things. Where so I live in the Channel Islands, so in Jersey, and it's kind of not quite classed as the UK for this program. So basically it's just not available, which is really annoying, unless I kind of do a VPN and try and make myself look like I'm exactly in the UK. But it's a really cool program, and if I could, I would try and exploit that thoroughly as much as possible.
Yeah, I've probably got £10 worth of things out of the reward service, and I've just put them towards Microsoft points so I can spend them in the store. But Mr. Tucci says I know a guy that gets around 40k per month. God, that's about 40 English pounds. I have no idea what they're doing for that.
Well, he's also said that there's apparently on Android there's a rewards automator app which Microsoft is okay of you using as it gets their Bing numbers up. So there we go. Maybe that's what we're doing wrong. We'll stop using Chrome on our phones. And
excellent. Oh, that's good. Well, we can earn ourselves a game every month if we follow those tactics. Then that's pretty good. Appreciate everyone in the chat. Thanks for joining in. If you like what you hear, please obviously consider subscribing. Hit that like button, hit the notification button so you know what's coming up. Share with friends. We're still completely new. I think we had 37 subscribers when I last checked this morning, but that is going up every day, and I am really grateful for everyone tuning in, spending time with us, getting involved in the comments. It's great to start seeing this community start building from the ground up. When we started on day one, Pux, we had 5 subscribers, I think, and we're a month old today, actually. So we've done all of that in a month. We've got about 130 followers on Twitter. So it's really nice to see this sort of community start. And I know you've been on Double Barrel Gaming, Luke. I've done one. We had VJ on last week. I've got a little project that I'm doing with Mr. Boomstick XL this week, strangely enough. So I'm really grateful for how the community is building, guys, and I really appreciate you being in the chat. So topic 4 for today. It's pretty much Game Pass, really, and the expansion of Game Pass. I was listening, strangely enough, to some Double Barrel Gaming, and lots of people sort of claim that Microsoft are making X amount of dollars out of Game Pass. And although I don't deny that they are making some money out of it, I'm not convinced they're making quite as much as people think they are at the moment. So I think the math that people do and then the logic that people sort of tend to follow is I think they assume there's roughly 15 million subscribers to Game Pass at the moment, which is probably fairly accurate. I think back in April, Microsoft disclosed that it was 10 million. We've not had anything official from them since. So I think, using that logical path, we could assume there's roughly 15 million. And in the US, it's $14.99 a month. So let's call it $15. So 15 million times 14 or 15 bucks every month. And you come up with a number. And it's a very large number. But what people don't tend to take into account is just quite the costs behind Game Pass and what it actually costs Microsoft to bring this service to everyone. So it was kind of a discussion around that really tonight, but also where Microsoft and what they can do to entice more people into the service, because there obviously becomes a threshold that the service starts paying for itself. So everything beyond that is actually profit, basically. And Microsoft, for every new member that they get subscribing, it doesn't actually cost them anything extra. Unlike, if you're having to deliver a product or, like the new consoles, for instance, someone who buys that, they expect a console back. But software as a service, the overheads for that per subscription are very low. So let's bring it to you first, Pux. Where do you think Microsoft will take Game Pass? And assuming that the 15 million subscribers they've got at the moment are the hardcore that we're going to subscribe anyway, how do they get the casuals in? And what messaging do they need to give to the casual market to entice people in?
Well, I think that's interesting, actually, because there's been current talk that we're due an announcement, I believe, from Phil Spencer regarding Game Pass, I believe early September anyway. But there's already talk that Game Pass may well be getting a lot of third-party titles into the mix alongside kind of the indies that we have on the service, as well as all the first-party titles. So, if assuming that is true and that we are going to start seeing larger third-party titles on the system, I think that is what will entice people in, especially if Microsoft manage to get these third-party releases on Game Pass on launch day. I think that will be, again, that's almost potentially wild thinking, right? Or just dreaming. But if that can be pulled off.
You say that. Phil Spencer said the other day that he's still got a very big Game Pass announcement yet to make. And I think that's the assumption people are making.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. So I'm assuming that's true and that is what is happening. I think that is what will get Game Pass off the ground even more outside of those kind of, I suppose, more hardcore gamers which are currently in the service. I know for me, on PC, it's only $3.99 a month for me, and I'm able to play all sorts of new content coming out as well as on console. When it started on PC, there was a lot more content available on console than on PC, but in the months up till now, nearly everything which is on console, I can also now play on PC. There are obviously a number of console exclusives which we're not due to be getting, because I don't think just because they're not supported. But it's definitely getting larger, and it's becoming more unified every month. So yes, with the addition of third parties, I think that is what will get people onto the service. Because if I'm paying the same amount every month, but now I'm being told that for that same price, I can now play even more stuff than just the Microsoft first parties and a load of kind of cool indie titles, then sign me up.
Yeah, I understand that argument. I'm just wondering if that's quiet enough because, what do you think, Luke? Is third parties going to be enough to bring everyone else in that they want to bring into Game Pass, or is there something else that they can do and need to do?
No, I think the third party stuff is probably right. I think that's the way that you get kind of these large increases kind of at one time of people getting into the service. If you can get it just has to be one big third party game that's either kind of day and date or shortly thereafter, and that could be, there's numerous games you could do for that, but you need something that's got a bit of buzz about it. So Cyberpunk or something like that. I think it's very unlikely they'll have that, but something to that level. And then I think, I mean, they just need to start, and they will. They just need to start kind of getting their first-party games out into the service. You know, Halo would have been a very big inflection point for them. It had it released at the end of the year, you know, and there would have been a significant uptick, I think, of subscribers as soon as that came in. And, you know, as their studios begin to release more content, you'll see those numbers grow, I think. But I don't think there's any one way that you really increase the amount of people that are in the service apart from just generating more content and potentially making it cheaper, which I can't see them doing. I think the rumors about this kind of announcement that I'd looked at and that I'd heard about were that they would bring Origin access into your subscription.
Mm-hmm.
Which would make sense and give it additional value right out of the bat, because Origin Access gives you a vault of EA games plus some non-EA games, which is, you know, adds to the amount of games in Game Pass and some of those quality titles as well. And then it gives you discounts across EA titles, and it gives you these kind of early access 10-hour trial period, kind of access to new EA titles that come out. So I think that would be another good way just of adding more value to the subscription. And maybe not, I don't know if that's a step that would attract a lot more people to it, but I think certainly it's a way to keep people invested. But I think the main thing is that there's two main things. Is one, start releasing more first party content, which they are doing. I mean, August in particular has been a big month for that for Microsoft. And two, get, you know, as big a third party game in there as possible. But I think just going back to the original kind of point that you had at the minute, and I think Microsoft, I think Aaron Greenberg, you know, said this in an interview, that, you know, it's not a significant money maker at the moment, Game Pass, because there's significant overheads in terms of studios.
It's a very high risk strategy when you think about it, isn't it? Because they have to, you know, there was a lot of outlay, and they had to get to a certain, you know, they had to do a hell of a lot of work and get a lot of subscribers on board before they've even started to break even. And I'm guessing they have broken even now, but
you'd think so. But I mean, you know, this is like, it's par for the course across subscription services like this. You only have to look at Netflix and Spotify, etc., particularly Netflix, which they're still making losses on their subscriptions because of the amount that they're investing in their own content and also securing, you know, third party stuff that can come on there. But the end goal is to make it sustainable over a period of time, to the point where you've got this kind of critical mass of subscribers and you're starting to generate some profit, and that quickly snowballs into a lot of profit, and the amount of subscribers and the amount of revenue that you have from those subscribers outweighs even significant outlays on your first party and what you're producing. And for Microsoft, they're in the look. I mean, Netflix are way down the line in this, and they're still making losses from time to time. Microsoft are kind of at the beginning of this journey relative to that point.
Well, they kind of have the market to themselves almost, don't they, at this moment in time?
Yeah, they do. You know, I'd be really interested to see if Sony suddenly kind of said, you know, they're going to take the same approach, first party games in PlayStation Now. What would happen to Game Pass in terms of, you know, how aggressive Microsoft would need to be to go out to secure reasons to go away from PlayStation Now. Because I think, you know, Sony could potentially make an enormous amount of money doing that. But I think right now they probably make a lot more money just having their you know, that as kind of a side thing, and then their first party that, you know, sells significant amounts of copies and makes a lot of money that way. So but it is high risk from them, and it's going to take a long time for it to be, you know, profitable, but when it is, it will be sustainable, and it will be really good for Microsoft, but it's just going to take a little time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we always seem to think about Game Pass and its expansion in terms of our own market, I guess. I think personally that the biggest gains for Microsoft is in the Asian market. If they could get into the Asian market and get people on Game Pass either via xCloud or a very cheap Series X, I think that would be a massively untapped market that would really benefit the service and get lots of people on board. But they'd need the games for that. I mean, what sort of games do you think, Puxley, that you need on the service to bring in the Asian market sector?
That's a difficult question. Admittedly, I don't know an awful lot about what the Asian market like to play outside of obviously a load of mobile titles. But I know my fiance's brother, who is from Malaysia. He very much likes playing like JRPGs on his phone, as well as on PC. And when I've had chats of him in the past, I very much his description of it was very much that Asian players like kind of the RPG titles a lot more. I mean, as well as, of course, things like Crossfire X and other first-person shooters and League of Legends and games like that are very popular. And the mobile equivalents are also what I think a lot of more hardcore players play out there. But we don't necessarily, those kind of games I don't think they definitely have their following, but I don't think they're that big in the West as much as, first person shooters and other titles like that. So I think if the service was to bring in more JRPG titles and MMOs and maybe that kind of genre of games, I think that may also help bring in more of the Asian market. I'm not suggesting that the Asian market don't like first-person shooters at all. It's just
no.
I think it's those kind of proper Japanese RPGs and MMOs and those kind of titles which I think will entice people in. But again, I think Game Pass is going to be having, I think it's Phantasy Star Online 2.
Yeah.
So I think that could be one title of many which could start to help bring in more players of the Asian market.
Yeah, it's a very, very valid point, and it does make me wonder if actually xCloud does actually kind of tend to lend itself to some JRPG games as well, because if it's turn-based, then you don't necessarily need that Twitch reaction. So xCloud services could actually, that could play into to this sort of Asian market, perhaps potentially. Yeah, some very interesting points there. So we've kind of brought it down to really the fact that obviously we need bigger and better titles to entice. So Mr. Tucci actually puts on there that my kids love Game Pass, and again we're bringing it back to the sort of the parents and stuff, because I think lots of kids in the PS4 at the beginning of the PS4 generation in the playground, it was the playground basically was saying that the PS4 was the better machine, and whether it was or not, open for debate. It probably was in terms of certainly power and price. But if that's the case this time round, from a value a value perspective, I think the Xbox have actually got this perhaps sewn up this generation with things like Game Pass, and that's a very valid point that you raised, Luke, about the EA games, because I think a lot of the sort of casual gamers or the sort of the people that play FIFA every single year don't necessarily care which system they play it on, as long as they get the best version of it, or the free version, perhaps, if it's coming to things like Origin or EA Access and things like that. It's a very interesting element to that I'd never really thought of before.
Yeah. I think 2 points really. I think just if you don't mind, just going back to the age point. I think sadly sometimes people in their own heads overstate how successful Game Pass will be there, because the Asian gaming markets are dominated by a couple of different types of games. One is mobile gaming, as Puxley said. The other is competitive gaming, particularly free-to-play competitive gaming that spans across, first-person shooters or MOBA type games. And I don't see where Game Pass really lends itself to those areas. Game Pass is brilliant if you're into a wide variety of different games. Mm-hmm. And I love Game Pass, and it should be very successful here. But if I'm in let's say South Korea, where the most popular kind of dedicated hardware games are things like League of Legends and Overwatch and Crossfire. And those types of games. I don't need Game Pass to enjoy those games, and there's no reason for me to buy that service unless I'm a really kind of hardcore gamer there and I'm fully aware of all the kind of different Western games that comes out and that I'm interested in. And likewise for mobile games, there's no need for me to have xCloud to buy into a mobile game because it doesn't require a subscription service to do that. So it's going to be interesting to see how Microsoft kind of appeal to those markets, and there are ways to do that, but I'm not sure off the top of my own head how they would go about doing that, because I just don't see the real need. And I think in Japan in particular, console gaming is just not, apart from the Switch, because of the nature of many of the games that come to the Switch, it's just not that big of a thing anymore. Back in the day when the original Xbox was trying to get into those markets, they were looking for this is Japan in particular. They were looking to try and bring big JRPGs to the system when they Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey, and then things like Ninja Gaiden, these Japanese developed games for Japanese audiences. But that day's gone now. The market isn't like that anymore. So I'd be interested to see what they do going forward with Game Pass to try and get it into those because how do you break that stranglehold of mobile games, etc. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, actually. And I probably hadn't considered that. Like you say, it's a very solid market over there already. So it's not like Microsoft have kind of got the market to themselves quite like they have perhaps over here. Like you said, it's perhaps a saturated market, and Microsoft need to elbow their way in somehow. Then that's a very valid point. How are we doing with the chat, Pux? What's going on in the chat? Is there much going on?
Yeah, it's good. Very active, engaging what we're talking about. Miss Tushy saying that JRPGs and that the Asian market love them, as we've discussed, which is good. Fugly does also mention here about that Avowed is, he finds Avowed really interesting and looking forward to it along with Senua 2. But I suppose speaking of Avowed, seeing as it's come up, do we think that games like that could also help entice the Asian markets in? Because again, we're talking about RPGs and stuff, but I think Western RPGs are very much medieval, whereas JRPGs are quite fantasy, aren't they? Do we reckon that if games like Avowed were to come to Game Pass, or like Elder Scrolls type games, do we reckon that those would help entice the Asian markets to the service for the people that like those games?
Oh, that's a good question. Well,
yeah, it's a bit out there, but it's I don't know, maybe.
There seems to be the sort of a fascination with the West and the Western side of things, particularly from Japan to a certain degree. So I don't know if the sort of medieval England aspect would actually sort of capture their imagination. Possibly. What do you think, Luke?
I think it'd be difficult. If you look at sales of kind of big AAA, Avowed's going to be a big AAA, a very big AAA game. First party game, but if you look at sales for similar games like Skyrim, etc., even years ago when Skyrim was released, and that was a bigger market for Western games performing in Asian markets, sales even then weren't particularly great in those markets for those types of games because again the interest is quite low. It's not to say that couldn't change, but I don't know how it would change, because I think the thing is as well that there's xCloud is ultimately we want, and I think Microsoft want xCloud to be a service that you can truly access, whether you're on a train or on a bus or you're in your own home. And if the market there is dominated by games that you have on your phone and that you play across those kind of mobile devices, that people aren't looking to play those kind of experiences in those, like Avowed, in those markets on a journey or anything like that. That that's why mobile gaming is so popular, because it's just a very quick gacha experience that's very addictive and that you'll probably spend a bit of money on, and that you really enjoy in that sense, and it's good for a journey. Avowed doesn't really, or games like that, big AAA games, don't really make sense in that market. They do in other markets, for sure.
It's a commitment, isn't it, playing a game like that?
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge commitment. I say that as someone who loves Skyrim, even I wouldn't be that tempted to play that on the go. Unless it was on the Switch or some dedicated hardware or I had a particularly long journey. So I think that could change, and something like Avowed could help in those markets, but I don't see it making much of an impact. I think they'd be better to, in all honesty, I think Microsoft would be better if they really want Game Pass to appeal in those sorts of markets, to have some kind of promotional tie-ins with existing big mobile franchises there. So whether you get a Game Pass subscription and you get, as silly as it sounds, more currency in a game that's already massive in those markets, something like that I think would be more successful than just trying to say, here's Game Pass as it is in the West, come to this service, because I don't think they're going to get very far with that in those markets.
No, that's a very good point. And, I know Microsoft and Xbox and Phil want to break into the sort of the Japanese and the East Asian market. And like you say, I think he's got a bit of an uphill battle there. There are options. And like you say, there's some pretty good options. Did we both catch up on I think it's Black Myth game from China this week?
I wanted to bring this up, actually, because I was going to pose a question, actually, because I think so far we've been talking about Game Pass and the Asian market, mainly about how does Microsoft, a Western business with a lot of Western titles on its service, and how do we appeal to the Eastern market, which I think is a very fair question, and we've been discussing that. But to flip that on its head, and this is also regarding Black Myth as well, because for those who may not have seen this trailer, Black Myth is a Dark Souls looking game, but it's actually made by a Chinese developer, I believe, which looks very good for me when I watch the gameplay footage. But what I've just been thinking about, actually, as you've been talking, is rather than just how do Microsoft get Eastern players onto the service where there's a lot of Western games, and again, we've had talks about the mobile platform, do we reckon that, or what do you guys think about Microsoft trying to bring in Eastern developers so that the Western market can then get more exposure to what Eastern players play, and to give that visibility? Because do we think that a service like Game Pass, if Microsoft were to do business with Eastern developers, do we think it would be lucrative for them to put their games on the service? So not only could Western developers enjoy that and then potentially build an audience, but would it be good for everyone in the long run, if not just trying to get Eastern players onto a Western service with mainly Western-based titles, but for us in the West to actually be engaged in what the Eastern side of the world play?
Yeah, I think that's possibly Microsoft's strategy. If they're bringing a game to the service, then they will bring it to the world service, I guess, the global service. And I think they've started making some headway with Crossfire X, to be honest, because I think a lot of people in the Western world had never really heard that game. And then when you realise it's actually the biggest game in the entire world and outnumbers, Call of Duty by about 10 to 1, if not more. I think things like that, it's opened the eyes of the Western market to the alternatives that actually happen in the East. But if they was to bring something like, I can't remember the game studio now for Black Myth, but if they was to bring something like that to Game Pass, I think that would really light up the Western world. What do you think, Luke?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that if you're an Eastern developer, looking to make games that are appeal to Western sensibilities, like Black Myth is, that's a very Dark Souls-esque looking game, and Dark Souls made by a Japanese studio, but it's most successful in Western countries. It makes total sense to bring those games to platforms like Game Pass and consoles in that sense, because as a developer, you're going to have far more success in our markets with those games than you would perhaps in your home market. And I think Black Myth looked really incredible, actually. One of the kind of one of the select few games I think that we've seen so far on next gen or targeted next gen spec that actually looked, next gen. I thought it looked incredible for what it is, and Microsoft have a history of or recent history of trying to involve more Eastern developers and their games on Game Pass or on their platforms. So obviously Puxley talks about Phantasy Star earlier, and Crossfire obviously, but they also have Bright Memory again, which is I believe Chinese-led development. It's just like one guy essentially with a bit of outsourcing, and Sony are doing the same as well. They have a game called Lost Soul Aside, which is kind of a Devil May Cry, Dark Souls type game. Which they're looking to introduce to Western players, because those, all of these games do well in these markets. So I think Microsoft would themselves do very well to keep doing what they're doing, and I fully expect them to try and get something like Black Myth onto their platform, if not into Game Pass, then at least on the console properly, because they just look great, and I think Western players would really take to them.
Yep, completely agree. Just having a look through the chat, actually. Fugley come up with a very good point, actually. I know we reverting back to what we said earlier a little bit about what Microsoft need to do to sort of keep on expanding Game Pass. But you come up with a good point, actually. Yeah, we've still got quite a few first-party studio titles that haven't even been announced officially yet. The initiative... I don't know what the Coalition are up to. I don't know if they're on Gears 6 or if they're still sort of trying to support Gears 5. Compulsion Games, we've still got quite a few of those to come. So, yeah, Microsoft, they bought all of these studios, and it's still yet to come to fruition with what they've bought. Is there anything else happening in the chat, Pux?
Nothing new that isn't based on what we've been talking about. Some comments, just following along the conversation. Mr. Sushi says that I think Phil is going for every genre possible to please more people. And that popped up alongside when I was posing the question of, should Microsoft try to get Eastern developers so that Western players can play Eastern titles? And then obviously following on with Fugley's comment about Tell Me Why coming to the service. I
guess, if you cast a very wide net, then you're going to capture lots of people in it, I guess. I think that's probably the approach from Phil. I don't know about you two, but do you always refer to games on Game Pass as being free?
No, if I'm playing a game on Game Pass, I usually kind of put in like a staple at the end that says on Game Pass. I'm playing this game.
To me, it always feels like it's So Flight Sim came out this week, and Battletoads. But to me, it always feels like it's free, because I think in my mind I've already written off that subscription. So when something new lands, it feels like it's free, and I think that's a very, very powerful thing that Microsoft. I don't even think they've done this consciously. It's just in everyone's psyche now that it's such good value that when these games do come along, it genuinely feels like they're free.
Yeah, I tend to have that kind of mental approach as well, that it does feel like these games are free, which I think sometimes actually, and this is just purely my experience of it, but works to Microsoft's advantage and disadvantage sometimes, because I think mentally when we think of something as free, it becomes more disposable. So there's been plenty of games in Game Pass that I've picked up and thought, that's decent, and then barely gone back to, and not really engaged with it any further, because in my own head it's akin to a free-to-play game or something to that effect, and it tends to be, in fairness, it doesn't tend to be their big first-party stuff, which feels like an event when it launches, but other games do. But there's also been games that have come into that service that feel free and that have really taken me by surprise, and that you put far more time into than you anticipated. So I think mostly it works to their advantage of creating this kind of mentality that all of this is free, and that only adds to the value of the service.
I mean, I hear it a lot when people talk about, you might as well get it because it's free, and obviously it's not. And Fugley put it, free to play, not free to own. But like you say, when you've written that off in your mind, that it's such great value, isn't it? It's I think that's kind of brought us to the end of all 4 of our topics, actually. I've had a really great time. I really appreciate you joining in, Luke. I really appreciate everyone on the comments. Thank you for your support. It's been absolutely brilliant. And we, you know, Puxley and I back in, well, a month ago now, like I say, we're only a month old, but back when we first started, it was always, you know, we kind of wanted the chat to be the last or the extra panel member, and it's really nice to bounce ideas off of people because, you know, we get lots of opinions and views, and it's nice to see how people feel. And it's not all about feeling the same, you know. Sometimes we disagree, and to be honest, Luke, you've opened my eyes to a few different things that I hadn't really considered before, and it's always really nice to have that happen as a moment. Anyone that's listening, we get a lot of viewers after the event, so I appreciate everyone that's stuck with us through the live feed and everyone in the comments. But for anyone who's listening after the event on catch up and the VOD, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Every single like, every single subscription that we get means the world to us, particularly as we are still so small. Like I say, as of this morning, we had 37 subscribers, but this time last month we had 0. So that's a huge step for us. I really appreciate it. We know we're tiny. We never pretend that we're anything bigger than we are. But if anything on this show that you think other people might like, really grateful for a share. Luke, you've been an absolute star. I really appreciate you giving your time for us this evening. You know, everyone's time's precious. Everyone in the chat, everyone listening, and particularly yourself. Thank you for your time. Where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Actually, I really like the dynamic on this show, and you're both great hosts, and particularly the interaction with chat, which I think is really great. And so yeah, really loved it, and great topics as well. Follow me on Twitter. I'm at Luke Steele 90, and I'll probably be posting pictures of Flight Simulator for the next 2 to 4 weeks.
Please do. You'll be making me envious. Have you got a pretty solid rig?
I do, yeah. I have a 2080 Ti, so I can get. Although Flight Simulator is one of the few games that really crunches my rig to the point where, like, you know, I mean, it's a sim game, so you're not expecting 60 FPS anyway, but it's nigh on impossible to get 60 FPS at the moment on that game. It's kind of this generation's Crisis, Flight Simulator. It's really demanding.
What res do you run it at?
So I run it mainly at 1440p. I can get 60 FPS at that on my monitor, but if I have a TV behind me, and if I put it up to that and try and get 4K, I'll usually get at the highest settings, I might get on average about 40 FPS. So it's really taxing.
Yeah, still playable though, still very playable.
Oh, very playable, but just I think if you PC game and you have a powerful rig, you tend to expect 60 FPS. You know what I mean? Like it's an expectation, and then it's quite jarring when you don't get it. It's kind of like, I
definitely fell into this trap as well when I booted it up for the first time earlier this week. There's me thinking I was going to get silky smooth 60 frames. Then when I'm seeing stutters, I'm thinking, oh no.
Like, what is going on? I don't understand this. Like, and you get these like lurching frame rate drops sometimes, and you're just kind of like, this isn't what this is what I expect. And then of course you look at the game and it looks. I mean, I don't know if you agree, Puxley, but I think it looks like a next gen game. It's kind of what I'd expect a next gen game to look like. It looks incredible, and you realize actually the technical things that it's doing, the draw distance, the kind of data streaming, everything, it's so demanding because it's actually worthwhile of being that demanding, like Crisis was back in the day. Like you knew that, and you appreciated that this thing wouldn't run as well as you might expect it to, because it's not really designed per se for this generation of hardware. It's really going to think next generation. So but yeah, so I'll post some screenshots up and everybody can see it in its glory, but it's so impressive. It's just incredible. But yeah, follow me on Twitter at Luke Steele 19. It's been great being here today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time. Puxley, where can we see you?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at PuxleyAR. I do also, my Xbox gamer tag is Puxley as well. If I have some time, I may be able to do some gaming now and again. But yes, that's where you can find me. I do try to post now and again. I'm currently not too active on Twitter, although I am active in terms of looking through it. I'm not quite an active poster yet, but as the following builds, I'll very much try to get better and improve. So I'll inform you all of what I've been up to more as the future goes on.
Now, thank you very much for your time. Next week, you're not with us, are you?
I'm not, I'm afraid. I'm away next weekend, but I will be around on the following show after that.
Yeah, so next week we have possibly 2 guests lined up. I've had such a welcoming, open-armed sort of welcome from the community. It's really been humbling, and I've probably got about the next 5 or 6 shows worth of guests lined up, believe it or not. People have been so kind. They've been very supportive, and I'm really grateful. Again, grateful in the chat as well. You guys have been fantastic. I am Phlapp. You can contact me at Phlapp2 Twitter. For some reason, Phlapp, I managed to get that handle on virtually every service, but for some reason it's taken on Twitter. So I'm Phlapp2 on there, which is slightly annoying, but I tend to do most of my posts through Green Pass Gaming. You can catch me on Xbox. My gamer tag is Phlapp. Follow me there. Send a friend request. We can play some games and things together. Thank you very much, everyone. I've had an absolute blast tonight. Thank you for the chat, Mr. Tushi, Fugly, VJ, Stubbs. You've all been amazing. This has been Green Pass Gaming, and we hope to see you on the next one.